Hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from noobcoder.com, and in this tutorial we're going to talk about arrow functions. Now arrow functions are exactly like the old functions we're used to, but with a major difference to the this keyword. So to give an example, we're going to declare a function the old way. We're going to use function expressions. So I'm going to say var add to, and we're just going to assign it this function. And within these parameters, we're going to say num1 and num2. And we're going to return the sum of these two numbers. Alright, so no tricks here. So to convert this, what I can say is const. You can use the let keyword to do this also, but I like const because I'm not going to reassign this function once I declare it. And remember, you also get rid of hoisting. So I'm going to say const add to, and we're just going to get rid of this function word completely. And we're just going to use the parentheses and just basically copy what's in here. So I have num1, num2, so these are our parameters that this function expects. And here I can use the arrow. Now, when I have one expression within the arrow function, I do not have to explicitly call return. It's going to return automatically. So I can say num1 plus num2. And this should return automatically without me specifying it. So I'm just going to comment this out. And you can use this for reference so you know how to convert old functions into the new ones. And let's actually call this. So I could say add to, and we're going to add 1 plus 1, right? So I'm just going to save it. And let's run it in Chrome. Hit refresh. You see 1 plus 1 is 2. So now let's talk more syntax with the arrow functions. So I'm just going to head over to my editor. And if you have 2 or more parameters, you just keep adding them like so, right? So no one's confused by that. But what happens if you have less than 2 parameters? Let's say I have 1 parameter. So it would look something like this, but I can also get rid of the parentheses. And if I remove this, and down here I could just pass 1 argument, and I'm just going to save it, and let's run it. You see that we get the value of 1. So that's if we have 1 parameter. So what happens if we have no parameters? Well, I just can't leave it empty like this. So I could have a parentheses and then have nothing in it. And within here, I can just print out something. So I can just say something. And I need to get rid of the console.log here because we're not returning anything. And now, if I save it, head over to Chrome, you see that something gets printed onto the console. So now what happens when we want more than one expression? We want a block of code to execute. Well, I could just go here and have our block, like so. So it's just like a regular function. Let's actually tidy this up a bit. And now this block of code is going to execute when I call add. But when you have a block and you don't have a single expression, you do need to specify if you're returning something. So if I'm returning, 1 plus 1, I have to explicitly call the return keyword. I just can't leave it like this. I just can't do that. I have to explicitly use return keyword. So now if I save this and run it, oh yeah, because I'm not printing out what we're returning. So now if I save that, just run it, you see that we get 2. So that's basically the syntax of using arrow functions in ES6. One last thing before I forget, if you could use functions to return object literals in JavaScript. So if I have this block of code, and if I was just to say return, and we'll just make a very simplistic object and save this, and now if I run it, you see that we get the object literal getting printed out and it's being returned. But let's say that I don't have this block. I just want to return this object. So let me just get rid of all this. Basically, this is one line of code. You have to wrap it within parentheses. And then I can just create the object as usual. So I can say ID set to 1. And now if I save this and run it, we should get the same result. So basically, if you were to do this in one expression, wrap your object literal in parentheses, and you could just return it like so. But if you wrap this whole thing like we did previously within these brackets, you don't have to worry about wrapping the object in parentheses. You could just call the return keyword and just return that object. So now I want to talk about arrow functions and the this keyword. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to create an object constructor. So I'm just going to say function person, and this person is going to have, actually I just want to show you what this means when, just to refresh. And now the troubles that we get when we nest functions within each other. So if I was just to pass this in, now if I say this here is going to be a different this, and that's because whenever you have a function, that function gets its own this. And let's say every 1 second we're going to print this out. So I'm going to say var person is equal to new person. So let's actually run this. Control S to save. Let's refresh. And there we go. So let's actually stop this or clear it. All right. So what's happening here? Well, set interval is going to keep executing every 1 second. But you saw that this within set interval is the window object. And we saw that the first time we ran this, that this is referring to the instance of the person object. So this and this are two different thises. So this belongs to this function. This belongs to this function within this function scope. So how do we fix this? Well, one way to fix this is to do the classic trick. So I could say var self is going to be assigned this. And then within here, instead of printing out this, I can say self. So if I save this, head over to Chrome, and now execute it, you can see that this is the first this within our object constructor, and now set interval keeps printing out this. So this is a nice little hack, a nice little trick, assigning this to a variable and then passing it in so we could manipulate it within this function. But a nice little trick with arrow functions is that I do not need to do this trick. So I can just do something like this. If I was just to change it. And now I don't need this self. I can just say this. Now this, and it's important to note that arrow functions do not get their own this. whereas regular functions do get their own this. So that's a very important difference. So this is going to be the same as this, the this that's within this block. So now if I refresh, you can see that we get the same exact result, and we don't have to pull any self tricks, any storing the this keyword within a self variable. It's also important to note that because the arrow functions don't get their own this, you can't use the functions bind, apply, or call on them.